for about 7 years. And we sell all over Sweden and a little bit in Denmark and Germany. So this is the sort of dirty side of the brewery. It's not very dirty, but it's not where the food is produced. But now we're entering the actual brewery. So this is where all the kombucha is produced. That's our bottling line there. Kombucha maturing, and then lots of buckets of kombucha. And here we have lots of tanks of kombucha. And that's what we do. So we cook tea over in these tanks here. And then it's fermented with a special culture. And then we flavor it in a variety of ways. And then we bottle it. And in the end, the product looks like that. So those are the products that we sell. And we have about 400 or 500 resellers in Sweden. So I'm going to put the computer down now, and this is where I'm going to do most of the talking. So if you've got a little vertigo from all that movement, it should be better now. Okay, so my name's Nick Rosenstock. I'm one of the founders of Roots of Malmö. Today I'm the CEO. I'm originally a microbiologist. My background was in science with a real interest in microbes and chemistry. I came to Sweden in 2010 to take a job at Lund University as a researcher in environmental research. Also in 2010, I moved in with a friend of mine, Matthias, who's the other founder. So what's a little special about Roots? Well, maybe I should first say where Roots is today and then take us back from the start. So today Roots is 7 people. 5 full-time employees, 2 part-time employees. We're growing. We did a turnover of a little over 4 million last year. We're on track to do a little over 5 million this year. We have, as I said, about 400 or 500 resellers around Sweden, and about 50–60% of our sales are through supermarkets, and the remainder are cafes and some private sales. And we're right now expanding into the German and Danish markets a bit. So how did we get here? So 2010, 2011, I'm living with a friend of mine. I'm working full-time at Lund University as a researcher, as is Matthias. But we have a passion for fermentation. We're foodies and we like learning stuff. We both like gardening, growing our own food. But we were fermenting a lot of things. We were making kombucha and kimchi and beer and sourdough bread and sauerkraut. And kombucha I had encountered in the US quite a lot. It's been popular there since the late 90s. And it struck us both that it was a little odd that there was just about no commercial kombucha in Sweden at the time. So we identified what we thought was a niche. We were also thinking at the time of maybe making kimchi. So the first kombucha we sold, we actually also sold some kimchi, but this was very hobby scale, just for fun. So we identified this niche that we know that there's a greater interest in low sugar or in reducing sugar consumption. There's a greater interest in general, live food, fermented foods. We're learning more and more. And that was then 2012, 2013, and still true today. And there's a greater interest in new kinds of flavors, not sweet flavors, sour flavors, savory flavors. So we thought really kombucha is an obvious interest in the market. It's an obvious gap in the market, but there was none. At the same time, we'd been making it for a while, and we had a lot of friends at the time who tried different kombuchas around the world, and they thought ours was really good. So we decided, just on a little bit of a hobby, why not we could try selling some. There was a possibility then, and still is in Sweden, and in Sweden you're allowed to produce some food in your kitchen if you follow best practices and sell it. You can't do that in the US. In general, the way we entered this market is a little, I think, unconventional in the sense that it was just a hobby from the beginning. It quickly grew into something more than a hobby, but we didn't begin with a business plan. We didn't begin with an idea of how big we wanted. We began with a passion. We began with an interest, and then to sell it was something fun. So I think a lot of the people who are listening here are interested in who are entrepreneurs, they may begin with a little bit different tact. I think we'll get to the same place quickly, but we were very risk averse early. which was necessary for who we were as individuals and where we were in our life, but almost certainly also held us back. So that at the end, I'll talk about some things that maybe I would do differently to get to where I am today if I were to start all over again. But anyway, so it was a hobby in the beginning. And so I would call this phase one, was planning and testing, working on recipes, working on the product. And very quickly after we'd sold a few batches that we made in our own kitchen, we came into contact with somebody who was the cook at a school, and they also have a cafe at that school. So we made an arrangement that we could use their industrial kitchen evenings or weekends, and they could sell our kombucha for free at their cafe. And, you know, at the time I didn't have kids. We were, I think, both somewhat single, so we had time, even though we had full-time jobs at the university, both of us. As I said, I was a microbiologist, and Matthias, my partner, as an economist, focusing on patterns of sustainable consumption. So we grew the business evenings and weekends just for fun because there was demand. The demand drove the production. We sold every bottle we produced, and we produced as much as we could, which wasn't terribly much. At a certain point, we bought a cargo bike. That was the first thing we actually bought, a small investment. But that was also with profits. So for a long time, we were 100% bootstrapped. Certainly in this, what I'm calling phase one planning phase, where we're using this other kitchen, we had zero risk, zero investment, a pretty high amount of sweat equity. It was a lot of long nights, but otherwise no risk. We were just doing it for fun. We've always had a good head for numbers, and I think that's very important to have an idea of what is your profit margin on your goods, does it make sense, and how do you set your prices? But we had no business plan. We had no concept of how big we were eventually going to be, or what was the size that we wanted to get. But we knew economies of scale, and we knew what we were making on each good. And it was fun that we were starting to actually make some money, but we invested everything back into the business. So after doing this for a year and a half, now we're in sort of the middle of 2015, we decide this is going so well and we're working really hard at it, but it's still manageable. It's a hobby. Let's take another step. So suddenly we take the step where we sign a lease for a place of our own. It was a relatively small place. The rent was not catastrophic. So the risk was again not high, but then we're putting more time into it. So now we start to actually have invested something. We've invested a lot of our time, and we start to use those profits to actually buy some real equipment. Also, at the end of 2015, beginning of 2016 now, we're a year at our new place, we start to hire people. So we have a lot more work than we can do. And we know the process well enough that we can take on other people. And this was a challenge for us, a little bit unique. How do we take this production that's been a little bit sort of, when we get around to it, and as much as we feel for, how do we make this a regular routine so that we can actually employ 2 people full-time, 9 to 5. We were used to working nights and weekends and wherever it was needed. We are fermenting something also, which takes time, and that time can vary. So how do we routinize the workflow? Another kind of decision you'll notice is being made along these different steps that I think a lot of people in the audience will make differently is we make, as you can see here, we make our product. And that is, it seems like a given, but in the sort of food sector, leaves made sector, that is far from a given. I would say the great majority of food startups and producers are not actually making their own product. And we'll come back into that in a little bit, why that could be and how you might want to make that decision yourself. But I think because we came from a passion for the product. The goal wasn't we're going to make this much money. The goal was, first, can we make this product? Will people like it? And then can we sell it? We were always grounded in, of course, we're going to make our product. But for many people, that's not nearly as clear. So here we are, sort of phase 2. We're getting serious. We've signed a lease. Now we've hired some people, and we're also investing a bit in equipment, but still fully bootstrapped. So no real risk, nobody else's money that we're playing with, no loans, no obligations. And this is a comfortable place to be. Bootstrapping is something that really holds you back in a lot of ways, because there will often be instances where maybe you want to invest a little more, but you only have the profits that you have generated to use. There are some advantages of bootstrapping, and I think for us, this was key in that it's lower pressure. You can shut down the business next week. I mean, yes, we had a lease and we had employees, but we didn't have hundreds of thousands of crowns or millions of crowns of debt that sits on the back of us that puts a lot of pressure. Now that pressure can be good. It can light a fire under you. It can make you strive for more, but it can also be difficult for some people. If you're coming at it from a passion for the product, I think a lot of people may lose that a little bit too quick when you're taking on a lot of external obligations and loans. Many people that I know in this space have started companies and taken in external money, and then sources of that external money start to apply undue pressure, and that could be just personal from or actual demands of you need to do this because we're expecting certain returns. So we were still in a very safe phase here in phase 2. And that takes us to about 2018. So 2018, now the company's grown. We have 3 full-time employees. Me and Matthias are still full-time employed at the university, but this is becoming challenging. We have kids now at this point. We have wives and children, and we're running a business which is super demanding, and we have a full-time job at the university. So we kind of had, that was a crossroads time for us. We had to make a decision. It no longer worked to have it as a hobby. Either we potentially find a buyer for the business, or we just put it down, because you, as a founder, as somebody who starts a company, you only have so much. And that amount is a lot less also once you have kids. But otherwise too, everybody has their own breaking point and how much work you can put into it, but you need to take care of yourself. And so for me, this was a very difficult decision. What I had at the university, I'd put a lot of years into, and this company was also really exciting. And I didn't want to let down our employees. So we decided to satsa på the company, Roots of Malmö. And that made the next decision quite obvious, which was where we were then. We had about 200 square meters of space, fully bootstrapped, but we had also reached max capacity for where we were. And we knew we needed to grow another step. And this brings up another important question. So one is the question that I already mentioned: do you want to produce your product yourself? And the next question is, how big do you want to be? Those two questions can be quite interlinked. In the brew space, you have a lot of things. You have beer breweries that make their own product, many of them. You also have others. You've probably heard of Mikkeller, for example. Mikkeller or Omnipolo, these are very famous brands, really hot, growing fast. But by and large, they don't make their own product. They have another brewer. They come up with recipes. They have a test kitchen. They have somebody else doing most of the production. We decided we wanted to make our own product, not least because if your product is innovative or unique, it can be hard to find other people to make your product the way you want it made. You'll also have much tighter control over product development if you're making it yourself, but it also is much more capital intensive. Many places, when they're growing, many companies, when they're growing, will report commonly that they made a big expansion, and then a year and a half into the expansion, the new place was already getting a little bit too small. So for us, we wanted to ensure against that. We didn't want to go too big, but we basically had a 5-year plan. At this point, when we're starting to think about this next move to where we are now we've got a business plan. Now we know what the costs are, and we also need to take in money. So this was a big step for us, to take in investors and to take loans from banks. And I think there's a lot that can be said for us having taken that step earlier. So when we first came out in 2014, we were basically the first on the market. By the time in 2019, we decided we were really ready to make the step, to grow, to take a big step forward so we can make what we want, what the market demands. There were others. There were other competitors who had actually gone beyond us, who had leapfrogged past us, even though we were first and we were the most innovative in the market. So that come at a cost. At the same time, the investors that we took on, we acquired those investors by being out on the market for a while. They were people who came to us because they believed in the brand. We had built up a brand at that point, and having built up that brand, that gave us a certain amount of capital with which to acquire capital. Had we just started with an idea, me, Matthias, who don't come from this space, who don't have the connections, may not have gotten those early investors, may have had a harder time getting a bank loan. So while I would say that we definitely could have moved faster, we had a very organic growth, and the record of bootstrapping that we developed and the good financial history that we developed was also pretty essential to getting that investment. So we take this big step. We're looking for a production facility. There was certainly nothing that was ready to go. So we knew we were going to have to make pretty significant investment into the facility, and we knew we wanted to go bigger. How big, though, was a question and a difficult one. I've always been very wary of getting into a sort of growth trap where a good size is always going to be about twice what you are then. So as costs increase, as you expand, there's the danger that it's always going to feel like if you just grow a little bit more, then you could be profitable. I think it's good to have an ambitious goal, but also an understanding of when you want to be profitable. And that's, I think, a little bit different if you're in the food production space or any kind of physical production space, but certainly if you're producing your own good or if you're making software. We went to a lot of investor networking type interactions, and they're looking for the hockey stick growth model. And we would talk to people and be able to show how far we'd come and how good we were, and then say, where do you want to be in 3 years? And when we gave the numbers, we could just see sort of their eyes gloss over. Because when you tell a potential investor often that you want to be twice as big in 2 years or 3 years, that's not very interesting. In a lot of sort of the entrepreneur startup world, it's not interesting unless you're talking about 10 or 100-fold growth. And that's just not really in your own product. But there are other investors who are more interested in investing in something that's real, that has a production space, that has a place you can visit, that is a substantial quantity, that is not just a brand and an idea and a licensing agreement. So, but it's a very different kind of product and it has a very different kind of growth trajectory. So we wanted to ensure that we could be profitable at a reasonable size and still give ourselves room to expand further beyond that. And not just expand in size, but also expand in the product assortment. For us, our dream has always been to keep making innovative products that people enjoy and that sort of push the envelope a little bit in the sort of food and beverage space. Things that get people, wow, that was interesting, that was tasty, but also are healthy, that sort of improve people's food trends, but not because they want to consume something healthy, but just because it's good. So as long as we can continue to innovate in that space, I think this is going to be really satisfying for us. At the same time, when we took this step, we knew we were going to be entering a period of loss. We knew that when we took on this big grand space, that our sales were not going to triple overnight, even though our costs did. So we factored in a growth phase period where we knew for about a year or two we're going to be running at a loss, and we have assumed a certain rate of growth. And this, I think, brings us to sort of benefits and drawbacks of a business plan. Obviously, you should have a business plan. Certainly, we, by this time, had been working on it for a while. And there's no drawback, there's no alternative to a business plan. One of the weaknesses of a business plan is that in your business plan, you're going to put in a growth projection. And that is a projection. It's very hard to put any certainty on it. We approached it, we had a sort of a pessimistic, a conservative, and an optimistic growth outlook. But it gets tricky when you are factoring in a period of loss. If you don't want to have to keep going back to your investors for more money, the path to profitability, the timeline to profitability has to be realistic. And when you're projecting into the future, it's pretty challenging to put a confidence interval on a projected loss or gain period. And that's where we are right now. We're growing. Our burn rate is decreasing, which is good, but we'd like it to be decreasing faster. We'd like to be growing a little bit faster. Things happened. COVID obviously happened. It was also a little challenging because, for example, we were not available to get any stud from the government for businesses who are affected by COVID because we were in a huge growth phase. Our sales continued to increase. They just increased a whole lot less than we were hoping they would, because our ability to sell into new places was severely limited. So given that sales have been strong in the supermarket sector, the fact that they've been a lot weaker in the restaurant and cafe sector has been manageable, but it's certainly been a bit of a challenge. Other unknowns always come up. You don't know who the next competitor could be. Yeah, so that's where we are now in what I would sort of call phase 3. Now we have real risk. We have banks' money, we have other people's money, and we're growing, but we need to grow, continue to grow. And I think for the most part that's going well, but we'll see where we are in 2 or 3 years, I would say. I'm very happy with where we are now. So I would say, you know, some challenges that we've encountered that were hard to foresee is that different sectors vary in what controls your access to the market. The standard model is that if you make a product that has a good margin and that people want to consume, that then it's just a logistical question of how to get it onto the shelves. And certainly we have logistical challenges. We make a refrigerated beverage, we ship it all over Sweden. There are a variety of challenges there. What's been more difficult for us to handle, and what I think would have been a reason why we could have found a strategic partner earlier, is that there are different sectors operate differently in terms of what grants you access to the customers. It's not always a direct relationship between customer and demand. In particular, in Sweden, the supermarket sector is dominated by 3 players. And those 3 players kind of set the terms and they set the rules. Also, if there's a product on the shelf that you sell better than, it doesn't mean you'll replace that product on the shelf, because that product might be part of a large food concern. So that product just stays on the shelf. It doesn't sell well, but it stays on the shelf. So for a supermarket to take your product in, they may have to make extra room, or they would have to take that product away, which they're unwilling to do because the people at the top have said, no, they've paid to be there, or that company is too important, so they stay there. So these we have had more challenges with in the last year, I would say. As we've gone beyond 100 shops, as we work into 200-300 shops, then what's called centralisering becomes relevant. And it's easy to get central listed if you're in a lot of shops and you're the only product in the category. But if there's other products in the category, particularly if they're represented by large conglomerates, they can stand in your way. And the ways that you get past that are challenging, and they don't have to do as much with classical economics. It's not just simply which product sells better or which product has a better margin. It's a lot about relationships, and it creates a set of inbuilt challenges to disruptors coming in. So we, as an independent food producer, are sort of disruptor, and there are barriers to us. We're working with them, but I spoke to a number of investors, or not a number, but at least 2 separate sort of venture capital types said, I don't invest in food startups. And this is the reason, because the supermarket sector is like known to really favor entrenched interests and to build a lot of barriers to independent producers. So that's something that we could have known going into it. Maybe that would have discouraged us. I think we're dealing.
How do you work with that? Sorry to interrupt you, but how it's a very important question that you bring up, and I figure that it's very, very difficult for you. But how do you, as a company, go around that? Because, well, you obviously sell your product.
Yeah, brand identity and hustle and quality. And just showing them the numbers, being really insistent, gathering your own sales statistics. We can show the supermarkets, look, our product sells much better than the competition. Here are the numbers. That helps convince people a little bit, but persistence as well. There are channels for small producers. We've exploited them quite a bit. I think a lot of small producers would be very, very happy to be in 150 different supermarkets, which we are. But I would say hard work. We have, invest in sales staff, be persistent. Part of getting into those 150 supermarkets is having 150 relationships and having somebody who's good at maintaining those. I lament that I feel like there's this sort of old boys network that restricts access, but the flip side of it is developing relationships can also be to our advantage. When the individual people who have the mandate to make those purchases see us repeatedly and we introduce ourselves, polite persistence, this is how you get through that. And to some extent, maybe in the future, I would hope, there have been talks about this. There have been articles in Sydsvenskan and Dagens Nyheter about it. There was recently a new law that came into play, an EU-wide directive that came into play in November to try and tackle this, because the supermarkets are relatively famous and well-known for rent seeking. They basically create a system where the almost only way you can be profitable is through central listing, and then they make you give up your firstborn child to get central listing. And they seem to sort of all behave very much in the same way, and particularly in Sweden, where there's only 3 chains that control so much of the sector, it's difficult to deal with. So driving a hard bargain, and hopefully a little bit more journalists reporting on it. There have been articles. There was a very scathing article in Sydsvenskan in the fall, or maybe it was spring to 2021. We said, ICA had a record year last year, and it's on the backs of small producers, because they squeeze them pretty hard so that as long as you're selling to individual shops, it's hard to be profitable. And then when you are pushed into central listing, it is that, they really ask for a lot. So how do we deal with it? We hustle. And we have a brand that people ask for, and we utmana. We're out there. People have to ask for us. And if just one person goes into a supermarket and asks for us, that doesn't cut it. We got to get a lot of people asking for us. Then the supermarkets go out after us. Another challenge is that, especially in the supermarket sector, the people who make the decisions are very poorly motivated by the performance of their sector. It seems like, honestly, to Bengt or Osa or whoever it is who's running the mairie department of this particular co-op or that particular ICA, they're not always so motivated to increase their sales. If it's more work for them, they'd rather it not be. So reducing the bar of more work is definitely a challenge for small local producers like us. One of the things we do is we're out in cafes and restaurants. We try and dominate that sector, because that's a sort of marketing or advertising for us. We make our money more on the supermarkets, but the curated nice cafes and restaurants show our product well, so that people will then go ask for us in the supermarkets. We do workshops, we do events, we do tastings. Being out there, being visible, being a brand of relevance is important. We basically have to work a little harder and be a little bit more visible to break through some of those entrenched barriers. Independent supermarkets are much easier to deal with. Sweden has very few. You're probably familiar with the chain Whole Foods, dominates the US. There's no real equivalent in Sweden. There is more of a Whole Foods equivalent in a lot of other European countries. Sweden is really dominated by Axfood, which owns Hemköp and Willys, Co-op and ICA. It's a little bit unique in that way. Of the little bit nicer upscale, organic, curated supermarkets, if you're in Stockholm, Butiken Rot or Kaiser Varg, these places, we do fantastically there. But there aren't enough of them in Sweden. There's maybe 10 or 15 such shops. So we are very focused on the major chains, but it is certainly a challenge. Also, there's 2 windows per year, and you have sort of limited access to get into them. So they simply will say, no, don't give a reason. And you show that your sales are way beyond the competitor, but they say, oh, not this time. So I would say, how do we get past that? The other way we get past that is we have a lot of things on the stove. We don't try and put all our eggs in one basket. I think for a lot of people in the food sector, the plan is central listing. And if your business plan is totally dependent on central listing, then I think I would suggest working a strategic partner earlier on into your business plan and planning. What does that mean? That means possibly getting a partial owner, which is a large food conglomerate or a medium-sized food conglomerate that already has the distribution network worked out. So for example, that could be a drinks distributor, or could be as big as something as Orkla. But having a strategic partner who can handle the logistics and also get you onto the shelves can make a big difference, even if your product is in demand and already selling well. So I think then I've taken you through just where we are. I guess the main lessons I would say is have a passion for your product. That's going to come through in your brand identity. We've seen so many products come and go. And one thing that's kind of nice where we are today is that we don't get so nervous by new competitors anymore, because we've seen how they come and go. And you could smell a real product from a product that's not going to be there in a year pretty easily. We've been wrong on some occasions. There are some products that have gotten big where we were really like, that's never going to last. But by and large, you can see what's a real brand that's driven by people with passion and what isn't. What is just a large conglomerate saying, oh, this is in right now, let's make one of these. And often those don't stick around. So have a passion for your product. Decide early on, how big is where you want to be? What's your size that you think is a good size to be? You don't have to limit yourself to that, but have an idea for how you're going to get to that. We didn't do that at all. And I think it would have been good to have done that a little bit earlier. And also deciding whether you want to make your product yourself. That's a big and pretty key decision. And I think most innovators in the food production space, most entrepreneurs who want to get their product out to retail shelves in a quantity, most decide not to make their product themselves. I think your likelihood of building an authentic brand is much higher if you're making your product yourself, but the risk is also much higher. Much more capital intensive, much more things that can go wrong, less scalable. Also, logistics makes a difference. Is your product shelf stable? A shelf stable product, you can produce in huge quantities somewhere, and then you just have to sell pallets out of a warehouse. That's a very different proposition than making something that needs to be refrigerated or frozen. Even if you don't make it yourself, that time aspect and the need for refrigeration and freezing, it changes quite a number of different logistics. We get a lot of people who would love to carry our product, and then they find out that it needs to be refrigerated, and that's a problem. Particularly for us, for example, if you have an innovative product. Now, kombucha is not new. It's 3,000 years old, and it's not even new in sort of industrialization, but it's a little bit new. And what's a little bit odd about kombucha is we have a beverage which needs to be refrigerated. And almost the entire beverage sector is a non-refrigerated sector. There's milk and the fresh juices, but everything else, all the beverage distributors don't have refrigerated storage. And that put us in a weird place. We've mostly dealt with it okay, but it was a challenge. And that's good to identify early on when you're planning what your product is and how you're going to grow your company. And I would say last, this has been a hard journey to get here. And there's no way I would have been able to do it if I didn't have a co-founder whose company I enjoyed. So being able to laugh with somebody and being able to commiserate when it's hard, being able to bounce ideas around with somebody else has been absolutely essential, both for the development of the business and for my own intellectual health. So I'd strongly recommend that. So yeah, I think it's a good example of some of the things that might do differently and what we've learned and where we are today. I hope it was inspiring. And I'm really happy to take questions if anybody has any.
Very nice, Nicholas or Nick. I'd enjoyed it very much, and it was truly, truly inspired to hear your journey. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Has anyone any questions? You can either turn on your mic and ask it, or you can write it in the chat if you don't dare to ask it yourself. I can start with a question that I been thinking about through your speech. Have you ever considered going abroad?
Yeah, so we early on, the obvious choice was Copenhagen. You know, we've got a huge metropolis right next door. And we did early on have some success in Copenhagen, and we're selling there, but we've also had some challenges there, some of which I've mentioned. So it's hard to believe that this is the case, but in order to legally sell bottles in Copenhagen, you have to have pant on them. Okay, that's not surprising. That's a good thing. So we tried to register for their pant system, and we're told, no, you can't register because you're not a Danish business. So we were happy to do the paperwork. We were happy to pay the fee. We were happy to put the stickers on ourselves, but we were basically excluded from the Danish market. So you have to have a Danish collaborator. I don't really understand how this is allowable in the EU context, but you have to be working with a Danish company. We have explored and worked with a few different beverage distributors over time, but this need for refrigeration has been a problem because the beverage distributors, by and large, are still not really handling refrigerated products. So one workaround we've had is that we use frugt og grønt, so more produce distributors who deal directly with restaurants. We've had some success with that, but they don't typically sell to supermarkets. So it's still been a challenge. We've actually been, early on by 2015-16, we were selling more in Umeå than we were in Copenhagen. So we've sort of de-emphasized that. Now we've reinvested in both the Danish market and particularly in the German market. So we're putting more effort in the German market. There, though, also we've running into some issues with bottles, recycling, and return systems. We have a returnable bottle, but there are logistical challenges of signing up to the system. So we've got demand. We're beginning to sell a little bit in Germany. We've got German labels on there. But in both Denmark and Germany, we're dealing with a sales environment where there are inbuilt obstacles that I would say are pretty clearly intentional obstacles. And I kind of understand this favoring your own native enterprises kind of approach that countries may have. But what's a little unfair is that Sweden doesn't do it. So for a Danish producer or a German producer to sell in Sweden, these obstacles don't exist. So the fact that these obstacles are not bilateral, that they're one way, that's a bit of sour apples. And I know that there is some interest on the EU level, certainly with this bottle return system and to standardize some of the recycling procedures of different bottle types. But that's been a challenge for us. We're exploiting the fact that both I have German in my background because my mother's Austrian, my other partner is Austrian. We have a German. Sorry, I know I'm hearing that. But we have a German background, so we're working on the German market, and it's starting to take off. So yeah, that's where we are. There are challenges to exporting, and I think there's probably more challenges for food product than many other products. I know the EU has reduced some of those challenges, but still some remain. Larissa, did you have a question? No? Okay.
Okay, does anyone else have a question? Well, it is almost 1 o'clock. Once again, thank you for joining us. This was our first Venture Lab event for the semester, and you really set the bar high.
Sorry for the strul in the beginning there.
Oh, no, don't worry. That's a common thing. That's more or less every time. So no worries. Do you provide training? Is there?
You're welcome to contact us. We take it often on a case-by-case basis. We have had interns. We've had master students. We try as much as possible to be a little bit dynamic, and also tours. So you're welcome to contact us. We have an info mail link on our website, and you can just mention me and I'll get forwarded to me.
Cool. don't forget our other speakers. Next week is I don't remember what next. Va? En gång till? Just that, tree consulting. Sorry. Just buy your tickets there or find out any other during the semester. We have a lot of exciting stuff going on. Once again, Nick, thank you very much. Good luck. I really hope you manage to come to Denmark and Germany so you can expand your business.
Yeah, us too. We're working on it. We'll get there.
I think
Great.
you are.
Thanks, Nicholas. Thanks, everybody. It was a pleasure. Feel free to email us comments, questions. We're very happy. We like feedback. Me too.
Cool.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Have a nice weekend.